Hello and a very warm welcome to you. I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Syrian opposition forces close in on the city of Homs as thousands flee the area. South Korea's ruling party leader warns of another attempt at martial law as MPs prepare to vote on President Yoon's impeachment. And who will become the next Prime Minister of France? President Macron vows to name Barnier's successor in the coming days. Our top story, and thousands of civilians have fled Syria's third biggest city of Homs as opposition forces close in on President Bashar al-Assad's political stronghold. After taking control of Aleppo and Hama earlier this week, it is thought the group could now focus on the capital, Damascus. Earlier today, the Russian embassy in Syria urged citizens to leave the country. Moscow has been a staunch supporter of the Syrian government. Let's talk about this more with conflict researcher and journalist Thomas van Linge. Thanks very much for joining me, Thomas. The situation currently is not looking good for President Assad, is it? Or do you think people are actually underestimating his resistance once opposition groups reach Damascus?
No, I would actually say that the situation has become desperate for the Assad regime, where in the previous days we saw a gradual advance from the rebels starting in Aleppo and moving southwards. We're now seeing a utter collapse of the regime's entire hold over the country's south and east of the country. In the east, we've seen Syrian Kurdish forces take over the city of Deir ez-Zor, following a complete regime withdrawal from the west bank of the Euphrates River. And in the south, we're now seeing rebel cells taking over. Yeah?
Yeah, I've still got you. I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry. And in the south, we can see rebel forces, rebel cells in Dara and Sueda taking over one town after the next, with the regime being unable to put up any kind of resistance. So it has really become a very desperate situation for the regime, which finds itself increasingly isolated in the capital, Damascus.
Is there any idea, or do you have any ideas as to where President Assad is? Is he in Damascus or is he elsewhere?
Well, the remarkable thing is that no one has really seen Assad since the rebel offensive started a little over a week ago. There were rumors at the time that he was in Moscow at the start of the offensive. Those were never really confirmed. Today, there are again rumors that he is in Tehran to discuss plans with the Iranian authorities, also unconfirmed. So it is really unclear where he is, but the fact that no one has seen him only increases the uncertainty and fear among his supporters.
The fact that Russia has urged its people to get out, is that any indication that Russia thinks Assad's government will fall?
It could be. I think what it mostly signals is Russia being unable to stop the current rebel advance across the country. Russia, of course, being severely limited by its war in Ukraine and can only conduct limited airstrikes at specific rebel targets. But at the moment, that is not enough to stop the entire advance happening in multiple regions against the Assad regime.
Thomas, I just want to ask you about this information we've got. It is from a source. It's reported that a source close to the Kremlin has told Bloomberg that Russia doesn't have any plans to save President Assad and doesn't see one emerging as long as the army continues to abandon its positions. What do you make of that information?
Well, it is a logical message when you consider that basically Russia saved the Assad regime from collapse 8 to 9 years ago. But then when Assad seemed assured of his power and Russia decided to focus on the war in Ukraine, Assad basically did nothing to build up his own defenses, to build up his own army. He basically became a very lazy dictator who let his armed force decay, assuming that any opposition to his rule had been defeated anyways. So that might have caused some frustration with the Russians, who have committed so many resources to keep him in power, while he himself did not pull his own weight after they left.
What about the situation for families in Syria. Many are trying to flee. Many, we understand, are very scared as opposition groups advance. What are you hearing?
Very mixed responses. It's like communities that have so far been loyal to Assad, like his Alawite community, are now heading towards the Mediterranean coast. The coast is the Alawite heartland, and it's basically where they could fortify the positions, considering the mountainous terrain that is there. When we see in other places of the country, which in the past were considered regime strongholds, like the town of Salamiyya in Hama or the southern province of Sueda, they are now actually switching sides towards rebellion, opening their doors towards the rebels to march in, or taking on regime forces themselves and taking control of their own areas. So we see sort of a break in the barrier between the Sunni majority in the country and the religious minorities who, out of fear, have mostly backed the Assad regime throughout the civil war.
Okay, Thomas van Linge, conflict researcher and journalist, really appreciate your insight. Thanks for talking to me here on W News.
My pleasure.
Well, let's now hear from our correspondent Trent Murray, who is in Tel Aviv. Hello to you, Trent. As thousands of people flee, Jordan has closed its border with Syria, and Israel has today issued a stern warning as well. What is Israel saying?
Yeah, that's right. Like many governments in this region, the Israelis are watching all of this with great surprise. The sheer speed of this lightning offensive has certainly caught them by surprise here. We know that the Jordanians in the past couple of hours indeed confirmed that the Nasir border crossing has now been closed. That is because the Syrian army is saying that their posts at the border came under fire from rebels. This is the only commercial and passenger border crossing between Syria and Jordan. Amman is saying that any Jordanians stuck on the other side of the border can still try to make their way across, but they are not letting anybody travel north. The Israelis, of course, are watching this really from several perspectives. The general instability, of course, is something that is concerning them, but what they don't want to see is Iran get involved in this fight. They, of course, share a fairly significant border with Syria in the occupied Golan Heights, and they really just don't want Iranian fighters anywhere near that border or their territory. So we are being told through multiple Israeli media reports that in the past 24 hours, Israel has conveyed to Tehran not to send fighters or, crucially, weapons that could end up in the hands of Hezbollah. And they've effectively sent a message that if fighters or weapons do arrive, then they could indeed be targeted by the IDF.
Israel is reportedly mulling over the creation of a buffer zone. What can you tell me about that?
We don't have a lot of information because of security reasons. They're not releasing it. But what they are saying is that they have called up additional troops to be placed along that border in the occupied Golan, and also additional air assets. Now, part of that region already does have some UN peacekeepers there as part of an initial buffer zone that has been there since the 70s, in effect. But obviously what's happening and the sheer speed of all of this means the Israelis are not taking any chances, and that is why they are bolstering their own strategic positions to, as they describe it, protect the state of Israel. But certainly the information we are hearing is that the IDF here at their HQ in Tel Aviv are running situation awareness reports on what is going on. But they are saying that they have really been surprised by the speed of all of this. They did expect Bashar al-Assad's forces to put up a stiffer resistance. They say the fact that his defensive lines are crumbling as fast as they are is just something that they did not anticipate. And we understand an emergency security cabinet meeting will be held here tomorrow in Israel to basically give a situation report on where things stand.
And Israel must be very concerned about what will happen if President Assad falls and perhaps more extremist figures take over.
Well, I think there's a degree of uncertainty, of course, isn't there, over what comes next. I mean, the IDF does operate in Syrian airspace, particularly with its air force, of course. Bashar al-Assad, no friend of Israel by any means, but what comes next, really, I guess, is anyone's sort of guessing game right now. There is clearly a degree of uncertainty. Syria has been ravaged by civil war now for well over a decade, and if these rebels do continue to make their march towards Damascus, which certainly seems to be the indication that they're going to do, then you know, really it's very difficult to see how any sort of change in authority there in Syria could impact the Israeli relationship. So as I say, right now it is just a show of strength, I suppose you could say, from Israel, with those additional troops and air assets being placed into position to make sure that that border is protected. But of course, it's worth remembering in all of this, in many ways, what is happening is a direct result of Israel's actions, because Hezbollah has long been bolstering Bashar al-Assad's forces, but of course they have been hammered really over the past couple of months with their direct conflict with Israel, and so that then opens up questions around whether that war in Lebanon has played a direct role in the sort of rapid collapse of Bashar al-Assad's forces in large swathes of Syria.
Absolutely. Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thanks so much for the update. Taking you to South Korea now, and the country's ruling party leader has said President Yoon Suk Yeol needs to be removed from power for trying to impose martial law. Yoon took the decision on Tuesday, citing threats from anti-state forces and North Korea, before reversing it just 6 hours later after Parliament, including some members of his party, voted to oppose the decree. Our correspondent Laura Westbrook has more from Hong Kong.
Yes, this was an abrupt U-turn from a key ally. Han Dong-hoon, who is the leader of the President Yoon Suk Yeol's own party, the People Power Party, said that his party had received credible evidence that Yoon had ordered the arrest of key politicians on the grounds that they were among those anti-state forces during the martial law. The presidential office later denied that, but according to reports, on that list was Han himself. A day earlier, he had said that his party would block the opposition's impeachment motion. But in light of this new information, Han called Yoon a danger to democracy and said that he should step down. Now, a vote to impeach Yoon is due to be held on Saturday. If that motion passes, Yoon Suk Yeol will be stripped of his presidential authority, at least until a constitutional court decides his fate. The opposition needs at least 8 votes from Yoon's ruling party to back the impeachment motion for it to succeed. Yoon declared martial law on Tuesday night, only to revoke it 6 hours later after a vote to overturn the martial law. And that sent shockwaves through the country and protests, with another mass rally expected on Saturday. Han also warned that Yoon might try to impose martial law again. But the Defense Ministry said if he did, the military would not follow. So Yoon does look increasingly isolated, and police have launched an investigation into the president and the Defense Minister, Kim Hong-hyun, who has since resigned. And in the meantime, opposition lawmakers have reportedly said that they will not leave the National Assembly until either the president resigns or they vote to impeach him.
Laura Westbrook, our correspondent in Hong Kong, thank you. President Joe Biden is considering whether to issue a blanket pardon for several of Donald Trump's opponents, even though they've not been charged with any crime. The idea would be to move preemptively before the president-elect gets into office and potentially acts with retribution, as he and his nominees have threatened to do. US correspondent Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
Merry Christmas, America. Merry Christmas to all of you. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Festive greetings from the president outside the White House on Thursday night. While inside, his team considers the serious matter of whether to act to protect opponents of Donald Trump before the president-elect gets back into office. Reports coming out suggest Joe Biden's top officials are debating whether to issue pardons now for people who've spoken out strongly about the future leader.
The vast weight of evidence presented so far has shown us that the central cause of January 6th was one man, Donald Trump.
Among those they're considering is Liz Cheney, a Republican who sat on the January 6th committee that found Trump took part in a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 results, and who went on to campaign for Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as House Democratic representative and prosecutor in Trump's first impeachment trial, Adam Schiff.
Despite this, certain White House and Secret Service witnesses previously testified that they had received no intelligence about...
Then there's General Mark Milley, former Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said Trump was a fascist and very dangerous. Well, Trump has gone as far as to say that Cheney should have a gun trained on her face and has put forward for positions loyalists such as Kash Patel as FBI director, who vowed to come after people who currently lead federal agencies, as well as Trump critics.
We also have a victim. That victim is Donald J. Trump.
Trump has also nominated Pam Bondi, who defended him in his first impeachment trial as the Attorney General. President Biden has recently issued a pardon amounting to immunity for his son Hunter for the period 2014 to 2024. That stops him from being put in jail for gun and tax charges, and also stops the future Trump administration from coming after him for anything else. But a blanket pardon for a host of other names, purely out of concern for retribution, would be something not seen in the US before. It split views in Washington, with some people saying it would be wrong to act defensively, and others saying President Biden has a responsibility to protect people before Trump gets in. Caroline Malone, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
To France now, and during his public address last night, President Macron said he would name a new Prime Minister in the coming days after Michel Barnier resigned following a no-confidence vote. During his speech, he told the French people he would stay in his position despite pressure to stand down.
C'est pourquoi je nommerai dans les prochains jours un Premier ministre.
Nobody can afford to wait to act, to be useful. The world and Europe are moving forward. We need a government that can make decisions. And finally, the mandate that you have democratically entrusted to me is for 5 years, and I will exercise it to the full. My responsibility is to ensure the continuity of the state, the proper functioning of our institutions, the independence of our country, and the protection of all of you.
President Macron very definite there that he is staying. Well, we can go live to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Hello to you, Ross. The President is having talks with several political leaders today. Talk us through the process and what he will need to consider before choosing Barnier's successor.
It's been a bit of a revolving door at the Élysée Palace today, the French presidential office and residence, as many different political leaders have been seeing the president for talks about the possible way forward, the direction for a new government, the name of a new prime minister. We know that the socialists did attend talks this morning with Emmanuel Macron. They said after those negotiations that the president did not put any preconditions on any particular subject, and that the president was also willing to speak to their left-wing allies, the Green Party and the far left, about a possible coalition with the left wing. However, the socialists also said that they would not be joining any coalition with a right-wing prime minister. Well, the right-wing representatives are at the Élysée this evening for their turn to talk to the President Emmanuel Macron, and they have said they would not be joining any coalition with a left-wing Prime Minister. So already we are seeing entrenched positions on all sides. He is going to try to find a Prime Minister who can command majority, or the biggest majority possible, garner the widest spread of support among as many MPs as possible in the National Assembly. However, because of the division in Parliament, that does seem a very tall order.
And the president has told the French people, Ross, that it will be a government of general interest. Exactly what does that mean?
Well, Pip, that's exactly what he said he would like to see. He hoped for a government of general interest, a government that has representatives from all political forces. That is what you might see in countries where they are more accustomed to working with coalition government. Having a coalition is something that is very rare in France. The politicians are used to having their positions set in stone. There's very little room for compromise. France is more accustomed to and more comfortable with a majority government. Rainbow coalitions that you might see in Germany or Ireland or Italy really are uncommon in France, and that's why it's proving so hard to try to find areas of common interest between parties that are so set in stone in terms of their general priorities. We did see one exception to that, the no confidence vote earlier in the week against Michel Barnier, which brought down the Prime Minister. Did see the far left and the far right team up, put aside their long list of differences to be able to bring about that no confidence vote and also encourage other opposition lawmakers to vote in favour of that. But it does seem that generally it's going to be hard to achieve President Macron's aim of a government of general interest.
OK, turning to another monumental, possibly happier event, Ross. Donald Trump travelling to Paris this weekend for the reopening of the Notre-Dame, his first foreign trip since the election, and it's also been announced that Britain's Prince William will be attending too.
Yeah, now it does come at an awkward time, the reopening of Notre-Dame, certainly with the political chaos going on here in France. But overall, it is a welcome good news story. The building, which is more than 1,000 years old, nearly completely destroyed by that infamous fire. I'm sure you'll remember back in April 2019 with the blaze ripping through the roof, destroying that part of the cathedral, the iconic spire tumbling down into the nave. Parisians and the world overall watched on in horror, but firefighters did manage to save the bell towers, save the overall core structure, and we have seen over the past 5.5 years an army of carpenters, glaziers, stonemasons, architects, engineers coming together to be able to reconstruct Notre Dame in time for the grand reopening this weekend, which will be attended by foreign dignitaries, heads of state. The president-elect of the United States, Donald Trump, will be here, along with his wife Melania Trump, representing the White House. It will be Dr. Jill Biden coming. The president himself, Joe Biden, is actually a practicing Catholic, but it will not be him attending. It will be the First Lady. We do know that for the United Kingdom, Prince William will be here. Sources also reporting that Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, also will be in attendance. For the main vigil, there will be a speech by the president here, Emmanuel Macron, in the evening on Saturday local time, followed by a concert that will be held inside Notre Dame. The first time the public will get an official look inside will be Sunday. The first public mass in more than 5 years will be held. It has been rebuilt, and apparently also inside it's lighter than before, it's brighter than before, even more resplendent, because they've taken the chance during these reconstruction works to scrub away some of the dirt, the dust and the grime that has accumulated over more than 1,000 years. So Notre Dame set for its grand reopening tomorrow.
As you say, Ross, a good news story. Thank you very much. Ross Cullen in Paris there. Let's bring you up to date with some other stories making news around the world. A Romanian court has annulled the first-round results of the country's presidential election, meaning the process must now be rerun. It's after security documents allege there was Russian influence behind far-right candidate Cullen on social media platforms. President Zelensky has addressed troops and military leaders in Kyiv today on the Day of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The country's leader said the Ukrainian army was the true guarantor of the country's security. Donald Trump has chosen former PayPal CEO David Sacks as his White House AI and crypto czar. The president-elect revealed on Truth Social that Sacks would work on a legal framework so the crypto industry has the clarity it's been asking for and can thrive in the US. It comes after a record jump in Bitcoin, the world's largest form of cryptocurrency. New York police are continuing to hunt for the killer who gunned down top health insurance exec Brian Thompson in Midtown Manhattan. Authorities have released another image of the suspect from a hostel on the Upper West Side of the city. It's thought he used a fake ID to check in after catching a bus to New York days before the shooting. An Australian synagogue was deliberately set on fire earlier today in what the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has called an act of hate. Worshippers were inside Melbourne's Adass Israel synagogue with reports of people throwing firebombs. One person was injured and the building was badly damaged. And a man in Canada has been left with serious injuries after rescuing his wife from a polar bear. The bear attacked the couple outside their home in Fort Severn, Ontario. Police were called after a neighbour shot the animal, who later died in nearby woods. Final preparations are underway in Ghana ahead of tomorrow's general election. There will definitely be a new president, as the incumbent, Nana Akufo-Addo, has served the constitutional maximum of 8 years in office. With rampant inflation and high youth unemployment, fixing the economy is top of the priority list for many voters. From the capital, Accra, Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports.
After weeks of campaigning, the final rallies have been held ahead of the general election. Polls suggest it's a two-horse race. Former President John Mahama of the NDC wants his old job back.
It is a defining moment for our nation. It is a choice between the Ghana we have today and the Ghana we want together. A Ghana of opportunity, prosperity, and justice for all.
Vice President Mahamudu Bawumia of the ruling NPP wants to step into the top job. He's been trying to persuade voters that things are starting to improve thanks to the government he's been a part of.
Fiscal deficit, exchange rate depreciation, and the trade balance were all moving in the right direction.
Both candidates have made bold promises to fix the ailing economy. Prices for food, fuel, and most other goods have risen sharply. Inflation in Ghana is among the highest anywhere in Africa, 23% in November, up from just over 22% the month before. It sparked a cost of living crisis that has left many Ghanaians struggling.
The cost of goods has become extremely high. In the past, a sack of onions cost 400 cedi. Today, it costs between 1,000 and 1,200. The price of pepper has also increased significantly. The world has become more challenging. If you go to our leaders, tell them to act because life is increasingly difficult and we are suffering.
There is thousands of citizens that are not working because there is no job. There is thousands of graduates that are free from education, but there is no job. They are just doing petty jobs, and those petty jobs, they cannot sustain them.
A limited amount of early voting has already taken place. Nearly 19 million more are expected to vote on Saturday.
Ghana is fast developing a status as a stable democracy in West Africa. Previous elections here have largely been peaceful, and officials here are hoping for more of the same once the polls open. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, Al Arabiya News, Accra, Ghana.
Bringing you some top business news, and US job growth increased in November after being affected by hurricanes and strikes in previous months. The return of Boeing workers and Hurricanes Helene and Milton saw an upturn in November payrolls, with the average hourly earnings increasing by 0.3%. That's up 3.9% year on year. Wall Street's main indexes opened higher this morning as a result of the payrolls report. Europe is bracing itself for higher gas prices over the coming winter months as stocks from China and Russia deplete. Gas prices are already the highest in more than a year, with the cold weather expected to add to the energy crisis. To sport now, and tensions are running high between Formula One rivals Max Verstappen and George Russell. There's been multiple accusations of bullying and lying between the two drivers ahead of this weekend's Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi. Tennis star Nick Kyrgios has secured a place in the main draw of the Australian Open in January. The 29-year-old has not played at a Grand Slam since the quarter-finals of the US Open in 2022 and has used his protected ranking to enter the competition. Kyrgios has suffered knee, foot and wrist injuries in the last 2 years, but will compete at the World Tennis League in Abu Dhabi in 2 weeks' time. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Syrian opposition forces close in on the city of Homs as thousands flee the area. South Korea's ruling party leader warns of another attempt at martial law as MPs prepare to vote on President Yoon's impeachment. And just who will become the next French Prime Minister? President Macron vows to name Barnier's successor in the coming days. And that's all from us on W News. Thanks so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And do not miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. From all of us here, good night.